about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio here in the good old USA to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government. Now, before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today, we're honored to have as a returning guest, economist Andy Sutton. Andy was originally formerly of the financial community, however, now is involved solely for the purpose of blowing the whistle on corruption and helping people around the globe become their own advocates. Andy, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio.
Hey, Joe. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. We talked about so many things. I'm not really sure what our subject is at this point, but so I'll leave it up to you exactly what we're talking about. I know there's everything that's going on around this world is gobbled. It's not going well. Everything from the government is screwed up to the financial system, internationally, the monetary system. I mean, I don't think I can find anything that's going right. And so let me leave it up to you. Take one of those and run with it, please.
I actually want to talk about an individual for the first little bit here, because this is one of those curiosities. Every so often we talk about people who, for whatever reason, have had like this halo, if you will, placed over their heads. And the guy I'm talking about is none other than Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari. And let me give you a little bit of background on Neil. He was a Goldman Sachs alum. I should say he is a Goldman Sachs alum. And when Hank Paulson got the Treasury Secretary's job, 13, 14 years ago now, the way the legend has it, Neil Kashkari called up Hank Paulson, says, I don't care what I have to do. If I have to sweep the floor, whatever, take me with you. So Paulson takes Kashkari over to Treasury, and very soon after, the next thing we know, this guy is basically in charge of distributing the TARP money. Remember that? The $750 billion big bailout back in 2008? Well, Kashkari was kind of leading the charge, if you will, of distributing this money. And as far as the money went, it was supposed to buy troubled assets. That's what it's named after. What it ended up doing was basically going to the banks instead. And once somebody pulls off, and I'm going to call it a job because I believe that's what it was. It was a job that had to be done by somebody. We haven't heard much of Hank strong dollars in the U.S. national interests, Paulson, since. He went under a rock, and we haven't really seen hide nor hair of him. Kashkari went to live in the mountains of Northern California in a cabin for a number of years. So he got shuffled off the chessboard really quick. He did his thing, off he went. Well, the interesting thing is he came back. And in 2016, he was named the president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank branch. And he's accumulating notoriety right now because he is going around on pretty much any show that will have him that has to do with current events, news, finance, economics, you name it, and saying that the only hope, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, that America has is to do a full lockdown. That's the only way we're going to. So now he's a biologist, too. Neil Kashkari apparently is. So he's added scientists to his battery of credentials, if you will. So he says that a lockdown is the only way we're gonna save the U.S. economy.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh. Reading between the lines, what that gets me thinking right away is, well, we've already seen the big paradigm change, and as the global reserve currency. It's been doing this for a number of years, and now it's basically being replaced in lock, stock, and barrel. So the Russians and the Chinese, we talked about this last time, they're doing the majority of their business away. What are we going to do with them? We have to put them somewhere. So that's why you're seeing NASDAQ 11,000. That's why you're seeing the Dow back up to as in Treasury debt, just because the government is spending so much money, and it can't be hidden, obviously. So we'll just keep doing bailout bills. Now they're arguing over another one, $1 trillion, $3 trillion. You know, who knows where that'll end up? But so that's what we're seeing. So it kind of ties in. Whenever you want to jump in. On another front, in the last 3 reported months, the U.S. consumer has paid back and paid off about $100 billion of consumer debt. So this is flashing me back to 2010, when for a whole year, basically, do that. And that is something that frightens monetary policy analysts, policymakers, government officials. It frightens them greatly, because making loans is one of the ways that we add inflation into the system, which is where we get most of our growth from. It's this added inflation. It's not real growth. But so those are some things that are going on right now, and all the while we've got unemployment, and that's way higher than 10%. What we're being told, we have all these jobs that have gotten snuffed out in the past 6 months or so by this coronavirus, and most of them are not coming back. And that's becoming obvious, whether it's Yelp, their surveys, or ADP, or whoever you listen to. These businesses, you know, the care money or whatever aside, they're going away, and they're not coming back. And this is one of the consequences of having an economy that is addicted to low-cost debt and a steady stream of it. As soon as there's a hiccup, you got a big problem. And we talked last time, so I don't want to get into this too much, but even in the beginning of last year, there were CEOs of major corporations talking about this looming recession that was dead ahead of us. That was coming regardless. We were going to get that recession. Right. Would have we had to do that massive bailout? Well, I don't know. You know, we could debate that, you know, until we're blue in the face. But this other stuff, and what we're seeing now, we talked last year a lot about modern monetary theory and how that's being floated as the way to, you know, save the dollar, if you will. And basically the idea there is you just create as much money as you can, and you keep doing that until prices start going up. And when prices start going up, then you raise taxes and you withdraw money from the system that way. And then once prices stabilize, you repeat the whole cycle over again. And that's exactly what's happening. These dollars are coming home. They're not wanted overseas. So the Fed, they could just get rid of them. I mean, most of them are just ones and zeros in computers anyway. They could seriously do some deflation and just get rid of that extra currency to hold the value, but they're not. And that should be a huge insight for the average person, because one of the Fed's mandates is price stability. And the way you do that is through maintaining the value of money, and they have not. done that at all. They have not even tried to do that, because you couldn't try and do a worse job. You really have to work at it to do a worse job. Mm. So all of this stuff, it is confusing, and people are kind of like, well, what is going on? But just the stuff we've been talking about here, a lot of sense now as to where we're going. And we're going down the modern monetary theory road. And I think we're also going down the whole concept of universal basic income. We've seen minimum wage increases snuck through the back door under the guise of helping essential workers. And there was a PA legislator today wrote something that I thought was pretty poignant. He said that every job is essential to the person who's working it. So just because, some suit somewhere doesn't think a job's essential, the person who's using that job to support their family is going to think something totally different. But anyway, so we're seeing all these things happen. And people have been asking for years, are we going to get hyperinflation in the United States? Are we going to get hyperinflation? And the answer was always no, because you need two things. You need lots of money, and then you need a wage price spiral. So when we start hearing about, we're going to double the minimum wage, well, you know what happens after a while. Prices catch up. Those people are in the same boat that they were in before the hike. Then we do it again. We have to raise it again. That's why it's been raised so many times since it was initiated. That and the fact that you have a currency that's constantly losing value. So you always have to raise that minimum wage. If we had an honest money system, first of all, you wouldn't need a minimum wage. And even if you decided to have one, you wouldn't need to raise it all the time. So there's all kinds of stuff. So you've got labor market over here, you have currency markets over here, geopolitics down in the middle. You've got all these things going on, but they're all kind of starting to come together like spokes in a gear. And so, like, for me, things are starting to make sense now, finally, which, is obviously a welcome thing. So did you want to cut in here? It looked like you wanted to say something.
I guess I'm of the old school. When you create currency out of thin air, which is what we're doing, in massive amounts, and I don't understand why it's not depreciating faster, and it's causing more of a problem because people, in effect, if they're not getting an increase in pay every time there's a devaluation of the dollar, which is a continuum. I know that it doesn't happen on a Wednesday. Why the whole currency doesn't collapse, the whole system doesn't collapse, and there are not riots in the streets saying that I'm not paying $24 for a loaf of bread, that type of thing.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. It's a mental state in a lot of ways. If this was going on in Europe, let's say the euro was the global standard, it was the reserve currency, and the exact same thing that's happening to the dollar now was happening in the euro right now, they would be rioting in the streets. They understand this stuff a little bit better than we do. We have a lot of distractions. We have sports. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, we don't. We have reality TV. Well, yeah, we have reality TV. We still have that, but we can't go to concerts. Apparently, enough people have decided, I'm gonna trim back on my borrowing. In April, May, and June. No, wait, March, April, and May. It was credit runs 2 months behind. March, April, and May, consumers paid off $100 billion. That's a lot of money. So that's a good thing. We need to be doing that. Right. But what that also does is it puts double pressure on the monetary system, because you've got this kind of back pressure, if you will, from overseas. Because if countries aren't using the dollar in their international settlements, they don't need to keep as many on hand. there's formulas that they'll use, and if we're doing X number of billion in business and we're using dollars to settle this percent, then this is how much we want to keep on reserve, that kind of thing. So when the amount of business drops, we don't need to hold as many dollars in reserve. So that increases the supply into the system, and given everything else the same, you're going to see a decrease in the price or the value of the dollar. And one of the ways that's been covered up is a lot of this excess cash has been dumped into assets. Things like treasury bonds, corporate bonds. You can pick up a business publication pretty much anywhere and find a story about how some company is losing money hand over fist, and they continue to get financing. And they should never get financing, but they're continuing to get financing. And so the money is going into, basically these, insolvent zombie operations that are running in different places, like picking up McDonald's fast food and delivering it to somebody's house is one thing that jumps into my head as something that's gotten an awful lot of funding and really hasn't shown ever a profit. So, you're seeing the money go there. You're seeing it go into things like tech stocks. Everybody thought the NASDAQ was a bubble at 5,000. Now it's 11,000. So some of that money is going there to do that. Have you noticed that no matter how bad the current events, the situation with the virus, the economic news, it doesn't matter how many people are filing for unemployment? Nothing matters. These markets, they just keep going up. And they're going up. It's not because, Mom and Pa Kettle are digging in the couch and finding dollar bills. It's going up because that's where a lot of this money is getting parked. And it's pushing prices up artificially. So that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen cheeseburgers go up in price by a whole bunch, is because we've seen the stocks that deliver the cheeseburgers go up. So they're trying to keep the price inflation in asset classes where it looks good. If it gets into prices, that's bad inflation. If it gets into assets, that's good inflation. So that's been a deflector. They've kind of kept things separated a little bit when it comes to, where the money is going. There's almost two economies. You've got this financial economy, and then you have the real economy. And most of the shenanigans right now are going on in the financial economy. But it's starting, because guess what? CPI came out, 0.6. Last month, 0.6. That's 7% per year, pace, 2 months in a row. That's way above what the Fed alleged was the case last year, which was like 2.2, 2.4%. They were happy with that. Well, now they got 7.2. So some of it's leaking, if you will, over into consumer prices. So this whole thing is going to get interesting. So if we're following modern monetary theory, now, okay, prices are going up. We got a tax. Guess what you're seeing articles about? Taxing. We need to raise taxes to pay for the CARES Act. We need to raise taxes to pay for, what are they, bailout bill number 4 or 5 for this virus. So we have to pay all these. We have to pay all these bills. Well, we need to raise taxes. So it's all kind of coming together a little bit into a form that makes sense. But they're not going to save the dollar with modern monetary theory. That's not going to happen. But it's another tool to push it down the road.
It almost seems because I'm a simplistic person. I'm not smart like you are. But it almost it almost seems like what we've done is that we are committing the same financial crime, if you will, but we've changed the names, and the distribution has changed somewhat, and now it's okay. Under the old times, my times, when I was young, if we did this, we would have hyperinflation. The whole place would be in total chaos. I cannot, for some reason, in my mind, understand how it's truly holding down prices while we're increasing the money supply, and then the market is going up exponentially when most of these companies are literally closed down. I mean, I think I'm this is a dream. This is not a real conversation. I'm going to wake up and say, "Whew, boy, I had a dream you wouldn't believe. It was insane." I mean, it's an absolutely insane situation. It's like, the less we work, the less we produce, the more money we get for free, the better the economy. Hey, I'm for that, but I'm not in that class. I don't do that. I work for a living. I've always worked. I work 24 hours a day, and I can't see how all of this meandering going on with the Fed and printing money out of thin air. Well, we don't print money. We just type it out and we get trillions of dollars, and somehow it all works out and we don't have inflation. So help me with that. I mean, I guess I'm just not smart enough to understand this.
No. That's the thing. We do have inflation. We have monetary inflation, obviously. I mean, just look at M2 over the last 10, 12 years. I mean, it's gone up, almost, it's 100% higher. So we do have monetary inflation, and we are getting price inflation, but it's in the prices of things that we want to go up, like a stock. So if, the average person, they got their 401k, their IRA, whatever, and they're invested in this big company index, that small company index, whatever. Well, as long as that price, because those are prices too, as long as those prices go up, that's good. We don't have a problem with that, even though it's still inflation. It's not because these operations or these firms or concerns are suddenly, reinventing the wheel. It is just because there's a limited number of shares and there's an ever-increasing amount of money that is chasing these shares because it has to sit somewhere. And that's the thing. Our country, our Treasury will not, do things like what China has done with its excess dollars and buy tangibles. We don't think like that. We have this attitude that we're above, that, normal, layman type economic activity. We can just do these sophisticated things, and we can have futures markets and do all this kind of stuff, but we're still having the inflation. So it's going into stocks, it's going into, you're seeing it show up in metal prices, whether you're talking semi-precious like silver, palladium, platinum, or, obviously gold just recently was over $2,000 an ounce. And it got whacked a little bit, but it's still over 1,900. And that's not showing that, hey, all of a sudden gold changed. Gold didn't change. The coins that they're making this year are the same as the coins they made 20 years ago. What changed is the dollar. The dollar's lost that much value. I mean, we were looking at 252 was the low back in 01 or 2000, whatever it was. Now we're pushing 10 times that. That's the dollar losing value. It's not that the coins suddenly, changed. They're the same as they were then.
Yeah.
So these are indications. But when you talk about CPI, and we know that they water that down. So if you're seeing 0.6 on CPI, that's being released, it's probably over 1%. So you're probably looking at least double-digit inflation at the consumer price level. So the things we have to buy, where we notice the prices are going up, and it's not a good thing. It's not the stock market. It's the celery market or the soup market or the burger market. We want those prices to stay down. We want that other, that stock market, that can go up. We don't care about that. We want the other stuff to stay down. Does that make sense? But they're all prices.
Yeah, but here's my problem. The thing I cannot seem to understand or appreciate is that more money in the system goes into buying stocks, price of stocks go up, but the company who issues the stock is selling less because the people are in effect have less purchasing power, because it depends on the value of the dollar, has less purchasing power. Thus, they are purchasing less. So we have a this illusion that the company is doing better, and it's actually doing worse because it's the value of the company is actually going down while the price per share is going up, and that's a recipe for absolute disaster. And if anyone who's got a half a brain and is investing, and I watch this stuff closely. I mean, I'm mostly a commodities investor, but I mean, I wouldn't touch these stocks. I mean, you can give them to me. I'd throw the paper in the garbage. I don't want to be associated with them. So this is what
that's where the biggest. No, that's all right. We got a delay here. That's where the biggest disconnect is. It's between the value of the enterprise itself and the perceived value that shows up in market capitalization through the share price. You have market capitalizations that are. I mean, you got Apple. They're in the trillions. As a company, I mean, what do they really do? They make some computers, they make some phones, some pads. I mean, this isn't rocket science. We're not, we're not splitting atoms here. We're selling junk. And, that's perceived to be extremely valuable. I'm not just picking on Apple. I mean, I'm using Apple to actually do this podcast. But you take a lot of these technology concerns, and there's not a lot of intrinsic value there. And you look at it, why would I pay that? Why would I pay this a share? Well, you wouldn't. That's just the honest truth. You wouldn't, because it's so distorted. So I mean, that's your distortion right now isn't on the consumer price side of things. It's in the value of the financial asset size. Look at the U.S. government bond market. How high bond prices are, and correspondingly how low bond yields are. But then you look at the credit situation of the country. We're 27 almost trillion in hock, and I'm sure they're going to push that into near 29, maybe 29 and a half even before the election comes around in a couple of months. Basically close to the end of the fiscal year, which is coming up at the end of September. So those bonds have no business being priced where they are.
Right.
Basically the investor is looking at this and saying, I'm basically getting nothing. So you take these yields and subtract that now rising CPI, you're left with a negative yield before you even get started. And to make it worse, a lot of these central banks now, they're talking about actually issuing bonds at negative yield. So you're going to pay the U.S. government for it to borrow money from you. Now, how stupid is that?
Right. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. You look at this. Well, this never happened in history before. This is like a dragon, in some kids movie, and the prince took the sword and stabbed the dragon in the heart. But what happens before the dragon actually dies? There's all kinds of thrashing and commotion and tail whipping and wrecking of things and all that. That's what's going on here. That our dollar is that dragon, and it's been dealt a mortal blow by those who had the stewardship of it as their responsibility. And now it's thrashing about and wrecking things, and that's what we're seeing here.
Well, how do you see this playing out? Because there's going to be what they call, come to Jesus meeting type thing, where something's going to happen. I mean, things always return to a balanced situation. It always comes out one way, shape, or form. We don't know how it's going to happen, how long it's going to take, or whatever. But we can't continue doing this. When the government starts running out of money, or people start running out of money because the government is not printing it out of thin air, they don't have jobs, and they hit the streets. And right now we see in Chicago, at night, 4 o'clock in the morning, they're looting high-end stores just to get as much as they can out of it. And there are news people there taking pictures of it, but I didn't see any policemen. I mean, wait a minute. If it's on TV, how come? Where's the police? Well, you can't even touch people who are breaking into stores and stealing all the goods. I mean, and what happens when the government discontinues the program of giving money out and people don't have jobs? I am so negative at this point. I don't want to talk about it because you'll think I'm absolutely insane for thinking the way I'm thinking.
No, there's a lot. I get a lot of emails, and there's a lot of people that are saying the same kinds of things. We've kind of, I wouldn't say we've hit the wall with the whole entitlement situation, but I'm going to say we've hit the wall because psychologically you have a huge percentage of the population that's drawing transfer payments from the government for a variety of things. And they expect that to continue. They're banking on that to continue. And we're getting to the point now where how much is enough? I mean, when they just put, dumped $2.2 trillion and it didn't even leave a mark. I mean, GDP went down by a third, and that was the rosy version. Our model came back at 42. So how much? You're getting to the point where this whole monetary situation is lifting off, and the slope continues to get steeper and steeper and steeper. And we're going to end up with a new currency out of this, a new currency regime, probably for the world. And right. It might be a single currency. I don't know what. It might be a bunch of regional deals. I don't know what that looks like at this point yet. It doesn't matter at this point really, except for the fact that that's what's coming. There's gonna be a new currency.
Yeah.
And we as holders of dollars are going to come up on the short end, which is the second point.
Right.
And the second takeaway. So what I've been suggesting to people is, look, if you have debt, pay it off. Well, why should we? If the debt is going to get depreciated, yeah. Well, if you don't have anything to pay it, where's that going to leave you? Everything's going to get repossessed on you, your house, your car. Get out of debt. If you're out of debt, get yourself some precious metals. If you have some precious metals and you think, hey, you know what, my house is going to need a roof in the next 10 years, get yourself a roof. Buy forward before this devaluation happens, because it's been this slow and steady devaluation. The one we're going to get next is going to be a fast one.
Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
right now.
It's interesting because I was born and raised in Harlem, New York. Tough neighborhood, and the East Bronx, right? And these are not luxury places to live. And I actually went to work. I took the subway. It was only a few miles, but I sometimes I walked and sometimes I took the subway. And when I got out of the subway, I had a National Guardsman with an automatic weapon escort me to the factory that I worked at. I mean, so I experienced this firsthand. I lived in an area when there were riots in the street where people were burning cars down and all that. I was there. I was living there, working there. In fact, I wasn't living there at the time. I had just moved to the Bronx, and that's why I took the subway. But I've seen this firsthand. I mean, I jogged from the train station, to my office with an automatic weapon right in my face, So I've seen this. I know this is real. I see this. I have no idea how I think about those days constantly. Every time I see on television, people breaking into stores and all this, I said, hey, I saw this back in the 1950s, and it's going to be much worse now. And people don't realize how terrible things get. I mean, everything stops.
That's the thing. We're too far removed from our last real period of national economic pain. I mean, even 2008, it was hectic for the average person for a month and a half, 2 months. unless there was a job loss or something like that. But then everybody kind of expected that there'd be a safety net there. And now what people are starting to realize is that safety net's full of holes. And people are falling through them here and there. And, the policymakers, they've made their intention they're going to burn the currency down. That's what they're going to do. They're going to burn the currency down, and then we're going to be stuck with another one. So that's and the depreciation.
Andy, what do you recommend before we sign off? What do you recommend people do who are listening to this program saying, if you're the regular Joe Blow with a job or maybe part-time job at this time or waiting to get a job, what do you recommend that they do?
If you have any way to get out of debt, do it. That's the big thing. That's one of the biggest lies out there is that, if the dollar gets depreciated or devalued or whatever, I don't have to pay this debt. Now, that's not how it will work for the average person. Your large companies, your governments, they have different rules for themselves than they do for the rest of us. Get yourself out from under it. After that, get yourself some kind of tangible money that you can use. Silver coins, U.S. vintage, Washington quarters, things like that. Roosevelt dimes, and so forth. If you've got, some kind of position there, buy things forward. Okay, so we've got 2 cars and we don't have any payments right now, but we know that one's probably going to go in the next couple of years. Replace it.
Well,
things you're going to need moving forward. Replace them.
Recently, I've been hearing that there's a shortage of nickels, but very few people understand that a nickel actually has a nickel worth of metal in it, so it's actually worth a nickel. So you can't depreciate it unless copper and zinc. It's copper and nickel and copper. It's like 75-25 or something like that. Unless that goes down, and that's not going down. That's going up with inflation. So the nickel, in fact, a couple of years ago, nickel was worth 8 cents. And they tried to, had to put legislation where they changed the content of the nickel, as they did with the dime and the half dollar and whatever. Not the dime, even the penny more recently. Anyway, but
worth 2 cents.
Yeah, and now they say there's a shortage of nickels. I wonder why. Maybe people are. You think people are saying, "Hey, wait! I heard the nickel was worth a nickel. At least that's real money. I want my share." Is that possible?
Don't give me that. We know you've got 10 or 12 big dump beds for 18-wheelers full of nickels down there in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
that's you.
I wish. Well, Andy, let's see. Wow, we've gone almost 45 minutes. We broke all the rules again.
This whole 20-minute thing never works out, does it?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Prior proper planning, that. Anyway, exactly. You have any closing comments?
Well, I want to thank you for having me on. I think that these next 6 months for our country are extremely important, and people need to be paying attention. And I know we've been not as active as we should have been writing things. We've been trying to hit the big stuff. It's the last summer we covered modern monetary theory. This summer we've got to, before it's over, we've got to look at, this new currency regime that's likely going to be coming. So just, keep an eye on the blog, andysutton.com. It'll take you right to the blog. And we're trying to get stuff up there, and it's slower than we'd like, but we're getting there. So I would just advise people just to keep their eye on things. The next 6 months are going to be very important.
Okay. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being on our show. We look forward to seeing you again.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. And with that, we don't know where our schedules have been very erratic and not as often as we'd like them, and we hope to pump this thing back up again. It's mostly my fault, and we've had some technical problems. So with that, we say, well, stay well and stay tuned.